Welcome back, cyber people. My name is Gavin Rook, and today we are talking about the fantastic tool called ZenMap. A little disclaimer on this video, anything enclosed in this video should not be used for malicious purposes. In other words, you can't just go start gaining information on random people's computers or networks. I'll be using all this information and tools inside my own environment, so I have my own permission to mess with my own hardware. In other words, you don't have your own permission to work on other people's hardware inside their networks. So be smart, don't be stupid, and be responsible. So to give you a little brief overview of what ZenMap is, it is a tool that is used to gain information about a network or sometimes even specific machines. Actually mostly for specific machines, and it's really easy to download. If you have to download the program, go ahead and click pause and go to just Google and Google ZenMap. Click on this link and it should bring you to where you need to be to download the version specific to your machine. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get started into what ZenMap actually is. So right when you start off, this can be, I guess, a little bit of a different interface depending on what machine you're using. Since I am using a Mac, the interface does look a little bit more clunky on Mac, I believe, than it does on something else. But there's a whole lot of stuff that's happening here, and I'm just going to start with something just to show you what's going on. It's going to make it a little bit easier for you. So the target is the actual IP you're going to search, or that you're going to scan. So I know that my router is 192.168.1.1, but in this case you can actually also scan network ranges, or in other words, you can scan an entire network in a subnet. So I'm going to do a 0/24, that's called CIDR notation, and that's going to scan the entire network, which is going to be 256 addresses. And you have the option of clicking quick scan here. There's a whole bunch of other different scans, and you can also see that the command will change based on what I click for the scan. So you can see a little command change right there. Quick scan plus. Let's go to a 10 scan and see what that says. So different types of scanning. Like I said, this was derived from the from the command line tool. So all these commands can be used inside the command line version. But since it's a GUI, a lot easier to show, we're just going to use the ZenMap GUI instead. So let's go ahead and do the quick scan, and we will start that. And depending on how fast this takes, I might actually just pause the video and come back when it's done. It usually doesn't take that long. I believe the last time I did it, it took about 30 seconds, 39 seconds to scan the range. There isn't really a whole lot of devices on my network, so it should be pretty easy to do. We'll give it a little bit longer. Maybe it's going to take a little bit longer than expected. Oh, also, you can see this little thing working right here. This might look a little different on your own machine if you're using a Windows or if you're using Linux. Okay, so we saw that is done. So let's go ahead and dissect what's going on here. Okay, so this is just kind of what's happening. Starting Nmap, the version of Nmap gives you the date and the report for the 1.1. So this is going to do it by machine. This is how it separates it out. You can also see in the left-hand side there's a little bar that shows it by host, so you get information by host. If this was a longer list, then it would automatically move down to that part in the list. But since this is such a small list, it doesn't even take up the whole window. It's not going to move around depending on which one you click on. But you can see things divided by Nmap scan report for 192.168.1.102. And then the 103 is my native machine that I'm recording this video on. The 102 is my Raspberry Pi with my server on it, and the 1.1 is my router. So let's go ahead and look at what is going on. Okay, so the Nmap scan showed that there was 99 closed ports, which means that there's not a whole lot going on this machine, or at least a lot that we can see on it. We did see that there is an open port, port 80, HTTP, which would make sense because for any kind of router configuration that I make to my Linksys, the Linksys defaults to logging in via a web browser. And you actually just type in the IP address on the web browser when you're on that network, and that's how you make all your configurations, rather than plugging in with like a console cable or something like that. So we do know that port's open. We got the MAC address from it, and it also shows us what type of hardware it's using. So we can see Cisco/Linksys. So not a whole lot on that device for information. Let's go down to the Raspberry Pi and map 1.102. Okay, so this one has 96 closed ports, but we do see a whole bunch of other ports set up here. And we can explain that because, for one, I did enable SSH on my Raspberry Pi, so if I wanted to, I could SSH from my machine that I'm recording on to my Raspberry Pi. Port 80s can be open, of course, because we're using the Apache server, which is a web server, so yes, it's going to be using HTTP traffic. 139 and 445 are specifically for my Samba server, and if you don't recall what a Samba server is, it is a file share server. So in my previous video where I was using Wireshark, we captured traffic of me going to from my native machine to the Raspberry Pi to access some files. So that's why those things are open. But we can also see the MAC address as well as the type of device that it is. And then since a Mac is a pretty shut down machine, there's not a whole lot default open on it, so 103 is pretty locked up. But let's do the exact same thing we just did, but we're going to make it an intent scan now, and we're going to see what comes up out of that. Now this one for sure is going to take a long time, so I think I'm going to stop the video now, and then we'll come back later. Alright guys, we are back, and let's go ahead and dissect what this intent scan did. Okay, so as you can see, there is just a ton of stuff here, but let's kind of just go through and see what's going on. Okay, so a lot of scripts running in the background. That just means ZenMap was running their own scripts to do all this stuff. And you can see all these host downs. When I did the intent scan, this is saying I want to scan every single address inside this subnet. And since there's 256 addresses total inside a single subnet for this class, that means it went through every single one to see if there's an actual machine there. So obviously on my network I don't have any machine with a 1.0. As you can see, it went from 0 to 2. That means it did capture the machine 1.1, which is my router, and then so that's going to acknowledge it further down. But since there's no machines on 34, nothing on 44, nothing on 52, it's just going to say it's down, assuming that there's nothing there to talk back, if that makes sense to you guys. But now we can see if I click on 1, it's going to automatically jump down. And there's some like brief information above it just to show what's going on. But it's just a little bit easier to click on the 1.1 and just gets right to the information. Okay, so the intent scan showed us a whole lot more that was going on here. So you can see port 80 TCP open HTTP was on there. And it's even showing us a version of the firmware that's being used on that router. Tomato WAP firmware HTTPD. It shows us the authorization. Let's see what we can get here. 401 unauthorized. That's probably not good. I'll probably have to do some digging on there to figure out what's going on with it. So as you remember in our last scan that we did in the quick scan, it didn't show us the open port 5431, which is sometimes why the intent scan is a little bit more useful, because we can recover more information from it. We can see that 5431 is used for UPnP, or Universal Plug and Play. It's a protocol that's really easily makes things easily connectable, which would be desired for a router that you just plug in and connect to straight out of the box, but not very good for security because it's not a very secure protocol. Let's see what else is going on here. It says it's running a version of Linux, and sometimes these little tools of discovering what kind of operating system it's using are not the most accurate. If I were to scan my Mac, it would probably... Actually, we're going to figure out down below if it says Linux or if it's going to say Mac OS. Sometimes those get confused. Let's see what else. It shows us one hop from the machine that's being scanned on to the device it went to. We can see other kind of device information. So it's saying it's probably Linux 2.4. It's a WAP, wireless access point router. A whole bunch of other information on it. And then we can see there the one hop, how long it took to get there. Okay, so let's move down to 102, which is my Raspberry Pi. Okay, so 996 closed ports. As we saw before, these are all the same kind of ports we saw that were open from the quick scan. But there's a lot more information on it. Let's check out the SSH stuff. So the SSH host key. So we actually found keys from the SSH, which is pretty fantastic. If you're trying to crack information going to and from a different machine using SSH, this might possibly be a way to do that. I'd have to do some more studying into that, but that's a really good piece of information to understand. We also saw 80 in our last scan, but now specifically now it's telling us that it's using Apache, and it's on a Raspbian OS, which is Raspberry Pi default OS. Let's see what else I got here. Just some stuff on the HTTP headers. We saw 139 and 445 open last time as well. One star is unrecognized despite returning data. Let's see what else is going on here. Give us a MAC address. Again, it's saying Raspberry Pi. Running a version of Linux. Raspbian is a version of Linux. It's Debian based. If we keep going down, there's something else I should have brought up as well. Okay, so let's check out the SMB stuff. Okay, so since it ran a certain amount of scripts on this machine, it pulled out some information that is going to be super useful to us. If I was trying to secure my own Raspberry Pi, this would really concern me, that it found the account guest. So as you remember last time I logged into my Samba server that I used the guest username. If I were an attacker and I understood the username, that would make cracking a password a whole lot easier than it would be if I didn't know the username. Now if I really wanted to, I could use the guest password or use the guest username and then start brute forcing a password if I really wanted to. And this is really great if I were a system administrator, because now I know some things that I could do better. Maybe I could make more complex usernames, tell my users to use better passwords. I could even set up encrypted traffic so it wouldn't be able to capture any of this stuff. Let's see what else we got here. Okay, so let's go down to my machine, 103. If I can find the 103, this one's a little bit more interesting to go through. Okay, here we go. 103, not the best thing to go through. Sometimes it's kind of hard to read through, but you just gotta keep working hard on it. Okay, so as you can see here also, it tried a couple times to figure out what the operating system was. And Mac apparently did a good job of keeping other people from understanding what it is based on scans, because it had a hard time figuring out. Seeing it can't even figure out what kind of operating system it's using. So the Mac did a great job of being secure. But as you can tell, this is some fantastic information to understand if you were trying to lock down your own network and secure the individual devices on your network. Like I said, this shouldn't be used for malicious purposes, but if someday down the road you became a penetration tester, I'm sure this is going to be one of the tools you use for information gathering. So, as we've said before, just be responsible with what you do with this information and what you do with this tool, and use it for good purposes, and use it to defend yourself, as well as any other machines you have permission to use. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, ask your fellow classmates, or you can leave a comment down below, and hopefully we'll be able to answer you. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for coming.